Digital 410 Productions proudly presents the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast with your hosts Dodd Abernathy, Jeff Copsetta, and Henry Sledge.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast, your favorite World War II based podcast. Sadly, Jeff is out tonight due to some scheduling conflicts, but he'll be back with us next week. But as always, is joining me live is Mr. Henry Sledge. Henry, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well, my friend. How are you?
Good. Little off basis, little update. Last week we were discussing, we didn't have a show because for the What's the Scuttlebutt audience, we've been cranking along pretty good since you joined, and we've been pretty busy and things have been getting crazy. I said, hey, you know what? Let's take off a week. Let's reorganize and come up with something for next week. And you sent me some photos. You said, hey, can you post these online because I'm dealing with a flood. Now, I'm in Florida. I deal with hurricanes. I grew up in Ohio and Kentucky. When someone sends you a text message saying they're dealing with a flood, you just assume their sump pump went out and their basement's flooding. And I was like, well, I hope everything turns out all right. To which you reply, well, we're fine here, but people are lost up in another township. And I was like, oh, he means like a real legitimate flood. So first and foremost, how's everything? I mean, it's been 2 weeks now, but I do apologize. Sometimes through text messages, when you say I'm dealing with a flood, I'm just like, oh, his basement's flooding. I hope some of his artifacts didn't get runs. I hope everything's good. You're like, no, there's people missing, Don. You're not understanding me.
No. We had, that's all good. We had in Hoover, Alabama here, we had approximately 8 to 12 inches of rain in a 24-hour period, which, is biblical proportion. And so we had a lot of water right here on my property. But, I mean, as far as any encroachment into the house, I mean, it was a little bit, just enough to get my wife and me up with I was out in the yard in this cold driving rain trying to get a sump pump set up. And the things we think about, Don, with the things we're interested in, I'm out there in this driving rain. It's really cold. I'm trying to set this damn sump pump up. And in my mind, I'm thinking about the Okinawa scene from the Pacific. when it's just torrents of rain, never ending. They're cold, they're miserable. And I'm looking around thinking, I'm so lucky that I'm not surrounded by horrible, this stench of death and everything else that those guys had. So, I was cursing my situation, but at the same time, I felt lucky.
Well, you and I have been talking about a book, and I believe it's at the forward of this book, and I may be wrong. I've read so many books. But on the book that you're currently reading, the one that says We Are Alive and Who Remain, it's the Untold Stories. Is it in the forward in that one where the author talks about how when he has to go out and run and he doesn't want to run, and he thinks about how horrible exercise is, he puts himself in a situation where he says, well, if I was on the front line, I'd be more than happy to basically and I do the same thing. I tell people, I've said this on the podcast before, anytime I'm like complaining about how bad my day is or having to do something I don't want to do, I think about how if I had a time machine and went back to whether it's the Pacific or the ETO and started telling these guys my problems. First, they'd say, I don't know what the internet is. But second, they'd say, I would truly switch places with you and hand me the rifle, hop in my time machine, and they would be gone. So
exactly
with that, and I do that quite a bit where I'm having something stupid or minute just bothers me. Like, could be a hell of a lot worse. I could even in modern day, we could be on a front line somewhere in a hostile situation trying to get home from Afghanistan somewhere. And so I find it really does help center you and kind of make you realize your problems of the day aren't that bad. And so I have those thoughts too.
Well, all that being said, we got away with minimal water damage. We had neighbors who got it pretty bad, and then there were some fatalities. Here in the Hoover area, very tragic, obviously. But we proceeded on our trip not the next day, but the day after that. So we had a good little few days at the beach down at Grayton Beach, and then got back and got back into the groove.
When you're outside dealing with the flooding, did any part of you think maybe I need to relocate some of my historical valuable things, i.e.
not really, because I mean, the situation wasn't that bad, and we've actually got a guy lined up to do a water mitigation project for us here on our property. So a large part of the issue will be alleviated when he does that.
Sure.
But I mean, I know what you're saying. I mean, I think about my dad's things, and it's like when I post those things on World War II in the Pacific, man, it just blows up, and I just think, good God, man, I can't ever let anything happen to this stuff.
Yeah. Well, and now I'm here in Florida. It's a little different. I think my house is 8 feet above sea level. And so whenever we get these hurricane threats, one of the things we always have to look at is the potential for storm surge. And the only time I've been worried about it in the 19 years I've lived down here, and the four or five hurricanes I lived through, about 3 or 4 years ago when Irma came through. Now,
Yes.
Irma did knock out my power. I was without power, and I'm on well, so no power means no well. Had no power, no well for 16 long days in the middle of a hot Florida day. Now, with that being said, at the time I worked in radio, so after day 9, one of our listeners who got their power back brought over his generator, but, it was provided enough electricity to turn on my refrigerator, a TV, no AC, and basically we ran a portable air conditioner here, which brought my home into a cool 89 degrees. But I bring all that up to say this. That has been the only time, because my dad he lives closer to the water. And he lives in a zone, a flood zone 1. And at the time, we were doing computer work for a fire department who was 15 minutes down the road from him out on the island. And they were moving all their equipment over to Fort Myers because they seriously thought there was a potential for a flood. And so since my house is a little higher up than my dad's, him and my stepmom stayed here. But I'm saying all that to get to this point. That is the only time that I actually looked at all my stuff. I wasn't worried about the reproduction stuff, but like my original historical items, I actually put those in a centralized location so that if flooding did get bad and we had to hit up on the roof,
Right.
it was my guns and my historical, once again, not my reproduction stuff, but my legitimate historical items that could not be replaced or lost, that I actually, clothing, books, all that, but it was that stuff that I had positioned right here in the room I'm sitting at now, that if things got bad where water started coming through and we had to get to higher ground, that was the stuff I was going to grab because, my first aid box that my grandfather brought home because he worked over, he did grave registration, ETO, and some of the paper photos I have, and just the stuff that water would destroy. That was the only time I ever really thought, okay, this stuff is not replaceable. It's going with me. The rest of it, insurance can cover.
Right.
And that's the only time I ever got to that point.
Well, hopefully we won't be there anytime again soon,
Yep. On a lighter note, thanks to Facebook, and I meant to bring this up 3 episodes ago, so it would have been early September. 9 years ago is when I did my very first World War II reenactment. So I've actually got into this hobby and if it wasn't, that begat this. So if I would have never gotten into World War II reenacting, I would have never gotten into this. And so basically the long road for me to get here started 9 years ago last month. That was my first reenactment. My first impression was Marine Corps. At the time, no one was doing it. I basically fell in with a guy named John Thomas who ran the 1st Infantry Division Living History down here. And he allowed me to go down to an event they actually had in my backyard, i.e. Naples, and allowed me to set up my Marine Corps stuff. And I just fell in with them, slowly hung out with him, slowly started producing, putting together a 1st Infantry Division so that I could do more living history events, because at the time, once again, there was no Marine Corps stuff going on. But any opportunity I had when we were going to museums and all that, I would bring out my Marine Corps stuff because 1 or 2 other people had it. And so when you go there, I'd have a lot of, Vietnam Marine Corps vets, Korean War vets, and, even modern day Marines who would be thrilled to see my little tiny display surrounded by all these Army displays because I was the only one, at least down in this area, doing it. And that's how I got into all this. But yeah, it's been 9 years. I can't believe it's gone that quick.
Man, but that's cool to know that.
Yeah. See, I made the logistical mistake. I was like, ooh, the first item I ever bought, and I don't think I ever told you this story. I brought it up in the podcast before. First item I ever got was an M1 helmet. And just whatever. I was looking through eBay, World War II stuff, saw one. It was a rear seam swivel bale, nothing fancy. But for me, never had any World War II stuff, I just bought it. Price was right. And it showed up, and I was like, wow, this thing's heavy. This is cool. And I just sat on my desk. And I started noticing anytime a friend or family member came to my house, they would pick it up. And they say, wow, this thing's heavy. I couldn't imagine living under this thing. I couldn't imagine hiking around with this thing and yada, yada, yada. And that's when it snapped with me. If something like a helmet sitting on my dresser or my desk could spark interest in this topic that I've been reading on, that I've started to develop what I've called an unexplainable, unquenchable thirst for knowledge on World War II. If something like a helmet could spark the interest in someone who previously had no interest before walking into this room and picking up this helmet, whether it's for 30 seconds, 15 minutes, or a half hour, if that one item can spark that sort of conversation with somebody, what could a full uniform do? What could a tent do? Canteen. And that's what we do. I often tell people who's never been to a living history event, and I'm not talking about the World War II reenactments with the gunfire, but living history where you walk around. I tell people, you ever been to a trade show? You know, where you're going to learn about cars or the latest AC units or fishing poles, and you're walking around from table to table. You got a bunch of salesmen. They got a table, all their stuff spread out, and they're trying to sell you stuff. They have these pitches out. They know them by heart. They regurgitate them. Well, that's all living history event is, except for we're not selling you our items. We're selling you the history. We have these well-written, regurgitated items memorized in our head, and every person comes through, just like at a trade show. Hey, how you doing? Let me tell you about my product. But the product is history, and it's all it is. And if you're a good salesperson, you can be a good living historian. And it's always fun to see when someone comes in for the first time. They got their gear, but they've never done an event. They're so timid. They don't, they haven't figured out that interaction with the public. And it's fun to see someone who continues to come back, come out of their shell, especially these younger cats who grew up with phones. They don't have the social interaction that we grew up with. And it's fun to see them come out of their shells like that.
I think I'm glad to hear they're young. We've talked enough. I don't do the reenactment thing. That's not my thing. I think it's great. There are people who do it. It provides an organic, visceral connection to the history. I totally respect the passion that reenactors have for the history. It's just never really been my thing. We've talked about that.
Yep.
But I think it's cool that there's some young people that you're seeing young people wanting to get into it.
Well, there is young people, and I don't want to break this topic, but the barrier to entry for living history is the cost. And so a lot of people don't get in it till they're in their 30s and 40s when technically they're too old to betray those people, but now they have careers and jobs that will afford them the ability to buy the uniforms, unless they're a younger kid who have parents who are willing to spend that amount of money on their child. And rightfully so, a lot of parents aren't into that because you have kids, hey, my kid's into this one week and next week he's into something completely different. So I'm not going to drop, that amount of money on a uniform that they're going to lose interest in a month and a half. But while we're on the topic of World War living history, I wish Jeff was here because Jeff, he'll talk about next week. He's got an opportunity coming up. And one of the things we've talked about on this podcast quite a bit is, as far as Florida, it's not the most historically accurate, but one of the more enjoyable living history events / reenactments, especially for someone like me who likes to do improv, who likes to interact with the public. Coming up the first weekend of November, it's actually November 4th, 5th, and 6th, is the Von Kessinger Express. And the cool thing about this is it takes place at the Florida Railroad Museum.
Okay.
And they actually have a train, and they got, maybe 8 to 10 miles worth of track. And before I explain all that, I'll just give you their website's introduction, their sales pitch for people, because they sell tickets to this thing. World War II comes to life. It's June 1944, France, soon after D-Day. The Allies are quickly approaching German General von Kessinger's camp. If your papers are in order, you'll be permitted to escape with the general aboard his train racing across France's countryside. As the French resistance, the United States and British forces give chase. Will the general evade capture? Be sure your papers are in order before finding out. The Germans will be checking for spies. And what all that means is, and this is very cool, we're all familiar with murder mystery tours, right? You get on the train and they act out murder mysteries. There's two events that produce basically the whole yearly income for this train museum. This event and their Santa Claus ride around Christmas. What this means is when the general public shows up at this museum, it looks like they're pulling in the German-occupied France. German flags everywhere. There's Weimar soldiers walking around, SS, and they buy tickets beforehand to ride the train because the train does go down like 10 miles worth of track. But when they get on, they're given German passports. the German reenactors, those who are up for it or interacting in, role playing, if you will. This is 1944. We're not going to break character. They're mean to some people.
Right.
And they hand them out papers. There's not really scripting, but well-rehearsed improv going on of what the situation is. The train leaves the station, goes halfway down the track. They usually take someone off to interrogate them, whatever. The Airborne comes out of the field because it's in the middle of nowhere. There's a small engagement. The Germans win for once. Hurrah. Usually take a prisoner or two. Go down to the other end of the track. Allies come in. There's another big skirmish. This time the Germans lose. Spoiler alert. The Allies get on. And now, as the train's going back from point B back to point A, there is basically live play going on between Art and whoever the German generals are, and they're basically acting out this whole hurrah, blah, 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 interacting with the trained people. One year I was on there, and we actually had some living historians dressed up as civilians in 1944 French clothing. I found one that had, it was very cool. I got great pictures of it. I didn't even know. I just opened a suitcase and he had printouts of the V-2 rockets. So he was basically a German scientist trying to hightail it out of there.
Oh, wow.
And so there's people in, air correct civilian clothing. We're acting out. It's once again like a murder mystery tour, but there's no script if you're good at improving and interacting with people. And so this goes on for the whole train ride back. You get back. Now the Germans come out. Obviously they want their train and their general back. There's one more big, reenactment. So that public gets to see 3 battle skirmishes in one day. They get to ride a train. They get to interact with people, and they feel like they're in 1944. Once again, it's not historically accurate. It's almost like a Universal Studio ride, but it's fun. It produces money for the museum. We do 2 of these on Saturday, so we're basically doing 2 shows on Saturday and then 1 on Sunday. So it's a great time. If you guys are down in Florida, you can head over to the FRRM.org. That is the Florida Railroad Museum.org. Get tickets.
When is this now?
November 3rd, Friday. No, it's the 6th and the 7th. So Friday is the 6th, and then Saturday is the 7th. It's $19 for adults, $15 for children. So basically,
that's a great way. That's a great way to engage people.
Mm-hmm. Price of a movie ticket, and it's live action, and you learn a little bit about history. And even if 2 kids go home, or 2 adults go home, out of all the people on that train, if 2 of them go home and stop when they're flipping through TV on a World War II based show and actually say, hey, I'm going to check this out. It's worth it. And you're raising money for a museum. And, we usually have some motorcycles out there. One year, Second Armor came out there with one of their smaller pieces and was lighting up their 50 cal with the blanks, which produces great muzzle blast. And it's fun. Wow. It's a good time. And
stuff like that, it engages people. And like you say, if you get one person, 1 person out of 10 or 2, who says, I'm kind of interested in this stuff. It makes me think of that movie, Kelly's Heroes or whatever. I mean, and it makes them want to maybe read a book or something.
Or nowadays with the kids, that reminds me of Call of Duty. I'll take it.
Exactly.
It's a foot in the door. Call of Duty is a video game, but the World War II ones are based on these guys. This really existed. Let me come show you, the uniforms and talk to you about these people. And now I really wish Jeff was here for this one because it's taking place in Texas. We don't get into political stuff on here, but this is right up our alley with World War II stuff. And it's happening in Texas. They have since apologized, but this falls under the category of bad results coming from good intentions. I'm just going to lay the groundwork. We've all heard, depending on where you live, how certain people feel about some of the curriculum being taught in schools. And some people, in case of Texas, have gone as far as saying, hey, if you're going to present some information on a certain topic, you need to provide opposing views. That way kids aren't getting indoctrinated. Good policy. Except for when it comes to this. And they have since apologized. You probably know where I'm going with this.
I'm afraid to even know.
Texas school officials tell teachers that Holocaust books should have countered with opposing views.
Yeah.
I don't mean to laugh, but
pull a pin on that grenade.
Don't mean to laugh, but once again, they've since realized the downside to this, because the only opposing views to the Holocaust would be, well, Mein Kampf. But anyhow, North Texas School District apologized last Thursday after administrator advised teachers that if they have any books about the Holocaust in their classrooms, they should also include reading materials that have, quote unquote, opposing perspectives of the genocides that killed millions of Jews. During the training session, and if you're listening at home, we're not laughing. We're laughing at the idiocracy and the stupidity behind such a announcement being made by a school board teacher. During the training session on what books teachers can have in their classroom libraries, Gina Petty, Executive Director of Curriculum and Instruction for the Carroll Independent School District, referenced a new Texas law that requires educators to present multiple perspectives when discussing, quote, widely debated and currently controversial issues. Now, I don't know how current and how controversial the Holocaust was. It's definitely not current. It's 80 years ago, and I think we've pretty much proven it happened. But anyhow, quote, just try to remember the concepts of House Bill 3979, Petty said on the October 8th meeting, according to records obtained by NBC News, which first reported the story, and make sure that if you have a book on the Holocaust, you have one that has opposing views of others' perspectives. As pointed out on World War II websites over the internet, so you want them to have Mein Kampf sitting next to it? I mean, what books are out there that they're trying to pass the Holocaust as in a positive perspective? Quote, how do you oppose the Holocaust? One teacher said in response, sounding baffled. Believe me, Petty said, that's come up. Lane Ledbetter, superintendent for Carroll's ISD in South Lake, Texas, apologized late Thursday, acknowledged that the authenticity of the recordings. Quote, during the conversations with teachers, comments made were in no way to convey the Holocaust was anything less than a terrible event in history. Ledbetter said in the statement posted on Facebook, additionally, we recognize that there are not two sides to the Holocaust. And as I prefaced this whole story, I get the idea that there's a lot of curriculum being taught out there that, people on the opposite side of the aisle don't like they're feeling that their kids are being indoctrinated and that there should be opposing views. And yes, that should happen on, let's just say 92% of the context out there. But when it comes to something like, the Holocaust or 9/11, things like that, there's really no positive opposing views of those
kind
subjects.
of an inflammatory topic.
Yeah. But the fact that the teacher, or unless she was basically, maybe the joke's on everybody else. Maybe this is her way of pointing out the lunacy of this law and using this as a way with a straight face of saying, hey, don't forget if you have to have a book on the Holocaust. So, but anyhow, that's out there. I figured it's World War II topic. We need to touch on it a little bit. But on the happier topics, we've decided we've been a little PTO heavy around here for a while. And so we are going to do a little ETO stuff. But more specifically, for those of you watching on YouTube, looking over my shoulder, you can see that good old Steve is no longer in his P-41s. He's now in his Airborne uniform. Because, one, I got to get the wrinkles out because that's what I'm going to wear at the Von Kessinger Express. But we figured we'd do a little ETO. And Henry, and rightfully so, because of his appearances and relationships with the guys over at We the Happy Few. Am I getting that right?
We Happy Few.
We Happy Few.
We Happy Few
506 podcast. Well, kind of a YouTube video podcast, but we'll just, for lack of better, we'll refer to as podcast. You've been doing a lot of topics and reading up on Band of Brothers and all that, so we thought we'd get into that a little bit, and I'll let you kind of crack open that egg, and I'll join in as we see fit.
Yeah. So, like you said, I mean, my personal ties to PTO, but I have a personal tie to the European theater too, as you may have heard me mention. My uncle, my dad's older brother, Edward Sledge, was in the 741st Tank Battalion. He was a tank commander, went to the Citadel. So, I mean, PTO history is in my DNA. It's just in my blood. Not very far behind it is my love for European stuff. So, Band of Brothers, just started watching it Friday night for the first time since probably 2010.
Okay.
But I'm 4 parts in. I got my son to actually sit through. He's 13, so probably still a little behind that curve, but he sat through the first 2 episodes.
And that's saying something because at that age, you're all about the action. He probably have a pretty easy
Right.
time sitting through some of the later episodes, but the first 2 episodes really is all about the training and character development and less about the
Exactly.
action and the jumping into Normandy. So for him to stick through the first 2 episodes, that's a good start.
He's, and I mean, I got to say, you referenced earlier Call of Duty. I mean, if we're going to talk video games, there's a World War II flight sim that I really like. I used to be actively involved with it, and I'm planning on getting back to it. It's IL-2 Sturmovik.
Okay.
Great World War II flight sim. First-person shooters aren't really my thing. I just never really got into them. But my son has played Call of Duty. And I've sat there and watched him play that, and I mean the graphics are pretty stunning, honestly. But I mean it's a far cry from the stuff we had when we were growing up.
Yeah, and the thing is too, there's a difference between the Call of Duty multiplayer and the campaign mode, especially if you go back. Have you ever seen? It came out probably 10 years ago. Call of Duty World at War. That
Yeah,
was the first
I think my son's
PTO
played it.
based one. That one's actually PTO based, and if you play the campaign mode, even though historians like us will go crazy that they're wearing P-44s in the wrong time, but you start out at Macon Island.
Right.
And work your way through. And the cool thing about that is, despite what people might nitpick about the campaign mode, one, Keith Sutherland's doing the narration, and in between levels when they're loading up, they're showing real footage, and they talk about the rain on Bougainville, and they talk about the tractor sinking, and so. Sadly, a lot of the kids don't get into the campaign mode. They're more about the multiplayer. But at least at World at War and some of the World War II based ones, when you play the campaign mode, they actually do put some history in those splash screens while the next level's loading. And the campaign mode on World at War, it's actually really it's pretty cool when you're in the trenches and you're on Guadalcanal and they got bonsai charges coming after you. And there's just wave upon wave of guys. It's pretty for the time. Obviously, the graphics won't stand up now because once again, I think the game's like 10 years old. But it was a damn good game at the time. And I think,
Again, I would have. There was a day and a time I would have said first-person shooters absolutely not my thing. And I mean, I'm still not going to sit down and play one. But I mean, it's gotten my son because I'll tell you this. So in my car, I keep a copy of my dad's book. Okay. And the reason I have it there is because, that once a month, as you know, that I work with a voice coach on developing narrative voiceover type talent. I read from my dad's book.
Sure.
Okay. Now, not to go back on with the old because we're trying to stay.
That's
ETO
fine.
here. But, after Jack started playing some of these games, like World at War being one of them, he'll get in the car to go with me somewhere and he'll see the book. He goes, "Hey, Daddy, can I read the book a little bit?" And yeah, go ahead. And he'll just pick a random spot and start reading it. You go for whatever you can get at that age. And if it gets another kid into the subject, then maybe first-person. I'm not saying first-person shooters are a bad thing at all. If it gets a kid interested in the history of it, and I know it does, that's a great thing.
And with that being said, they do have a new World War II themed Call of Duty game coming out. Of course, they do have to change some things to make it more palatable for today's generations. But the cool thing is, on the campaign mode, they're actually going to do some North Africa stuff. And so it's not the, most of these World War II games, a majority of them take place in Europe with the exception of World at War. But this one actually they're going to do North Africa. They're going to have some Italy campaigns. And so for those young cats who do actually play the campaign mode with the storytelling, they will learn a little bit about North Africa and Italy and all that. So, that is beneficial as well. But anyhow, back to Band of Brothers.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got through Replacements Part 4. And so Bastogne will be the next episode. And it's interesting, as I sat there and watched it, and just of course, we're probably the same here, and Jeff too. Practically memorized every line in it. And as I sat there and watched it, it several things went through my mind. Number one, just what a well done production it was. But number two, it also it reaffirmed my newfound belief that I've told you guys about. The Pacific stands up well. I really believe it does. I mean, because I don't care what it is. There's always going to be something you wish had been done a little bit different. And when I first saw the Pacific years ago, there were so many things like, oh man, why did they use that?
You're too close to it, but yeah.
But when I watch Band of Brothers, I'm thoroughly enjoying it. It's great. It's wonderful, beautifully done. And yet there's still little things in there that I'm like, yeah, okay, well, I wish they'd done this, or there's not much, and there's not much in the Pacific either. But my point is that I'm thoroughly enjoying re-engaging with Band of Brothers, but it's also made me realize the Pacific stands up well.
I often tell people my personal belief, the differences between the two. I think Band of Brothers is more character-driven. Now, that may sound a little weird because they do have characters in the Pacific, but I think the Pacific does a better job focusing on the daily struggles living in that situation. They actually touch on, the diarrhea, the dysentery, the actual battle against the elements. When they weren't fighting, they're fighting the elements. And whereas Band of Brothers was, once again, they're two different things that but to me the bigger difference is like if you're into character development and all that, Band of Brothers is probably going to spark your interest a little bit more. But to me, I love them both. I actually have both of them were actually gifts to me when I worked in radio by the host. He got me both of them. One for got me the Pacific box set for my birthday and Band of Brothers for Christmas. So I have both of them. But and I'm looking at right now, I got 7 books on the Band of Brothers and probably 9 on the PTO. So
so to piggyback onto that, I'm reading the book we talked about, Marcus Brotherton's book. We Who Are Alive and Who Remain, which
is a great book because it talks about the people who were either not talked about at all in Band of Brothers or provides more detail. Like Earl McClung, he was briefly discussed in Band of Brothers. Once you watch it for the 8th or 9th time, you'll realize his name was mentioned here and there more than you realize the first time through. But you really don't get you don't know why they call him One Lung McClung until you read that book. But
exactly.
This book actually talks about, because there were more people in that division than just the 20 or so covered in that miniseries in Stephen Ambrose's book. So it gives you a well-rounded story, just like I think you would agree after reading With the Old Breed or Helmet with My Pillow. If you enjoyed those books, it would behoove you to get a more full picture to then move on to A Strong Men Armed, and then maybe Guadalcanal Diaries or Battle for Guadalcanal or Guadalcanal book. But I think a good way to get yourself into that is to read the ones everybody knows about, the Band of Brothers, and then read all the offshoots, and then read, in the PTO. Once you read Home for My Pillow With the Old Breed, then read Strong Men Armed, and it helps tie it all together.
Right, and reading the book I'm reading now, like you just said, I mean, I remember I've got name recognition on the characters well enough that I'm thinking, okay, so they took liberties. They have to do character compression and storyline compression. You have to do those things because you can't make it 80 parts. People like us would like that, but you can't do that until the story. And so they did that in Band of Brothers too. They were like, you get the feeling that all those guys are like every one of them, every single one of them started at Toccoa. Well, then reading this book, you realize, well, there was a cadre that did, but there were a bunch of them that were just all over, and they got fed in piecemeal at different times.
Like Babe Heffron. He was a replacement. Yeah. And, we've talked about this before when it comes to this type of miniseries. Sometimes the story is more important than the person that it happened to. And so instead of shooting an entire episode or show or doing character development on a single person just to tell one story, let's take that event or story and apply it to someone else we've already spent time and energy developing the character for, because it just makes more sense that way.
Exactly.
And we definitely saw it in the Pacific. And once you start reading these offshoots of the book, you'll realize they did the same thing in Band of Brothers. And that's just the way it has to go. When you have a 12 episode, you know, do you want to leave the story out because you didn't develop the person that it happened to, or do you want to take that important story and message and just apply it to somebody else?
And it serves the larger picture.
You know, I think we'd be remiss to mention, and you've already seen the episode, Operation Market Garden. And I sent you a text, said, you know, I'm rereading this book called September Hope about the debacle that was Operation Market Garden.
Who wrote that? Who's the author on that?
John C. McManus.
McManus?
Yeah, author of a book called Grunts.
Okay. I mean, I've actually he and I just became Facebook friends. I mean, I'm very familiar with some of his work.
Cool. Maybe we can get him on the show.
So I need to read that book.
Yeah, and now from reading Band of Brothers and, you know, some of those others, or watching history on Operation Market Garden, we all kind of know, okay, it's the first time the Airborne had to retreat. It was the first time we handed the reins over to Montgomery. But reading this book, it really gets into the backstory of how the whole thing came to be. Mm-hmm. And first and foremost, Eisenhower and Montgomery were not fans of each other. Right. Going back to their first meeting, the very first time Montgomery met Eisenhower, he took it upon himself to, let's just say, less than politely tell Eisenhower why it was in bad form to smoke in front of him, while Eisenhower was giving a lecture to a bunch of other people. So it wasn't a one-on-one meeting. Eisenhower was basically going over some details with a bunch of other leaders, and Montgomery came in and, how dare you smoke in front of me? And they had this whole thing. And so they weren't fans of each other from then. Eisenhower kind of thought Montgomery was obtuse and full of himself. But, you know, Montgomery kind of had the opinion, and so did other people, that, you know, Eisenhower was an office general. He very rarely came out, whereas Montgomery had served all these years. But anyhow, what's interesting is Montgomery really wanted to get a single front push. He thought that if he could get his way, he could have a single front push all the way into Germany. Bob's your uncle that's in the war by the end of 44. Whereas Eisenhower felt, you know, we have to attack on multiple fronts, spread out their logistics, spread out their availability. Let's weaken them that way, you know, because if we had single front, all they got to do was bring all their equipment in and meet us to that single front. And so Montgomery had been hammering him about, hey, we need a single front. We need a single front. Eisenhower's like, nay. Turns out Eisenhower had he had a bad left leg from a football accident when he played in college at West Point. Mm-hmm. And so his left leg was always kind of bummed. Then he had his good right knee, but he was out doing some reconnaissance or something along with his Jeep Rider. No, I'm sorry. He was like in a biplane, a small plane. They're doing reconnaissance. Something happened. The plane had to make a crash landing on the beach, and he busted up his right knee. And so his right leg was actually in a cast when he came to meet Montgomery to finally talk to him about basically annoying the living hell out of him through letters and lines about this operation. He thought that they actually wasn't even an operation. He wanted just to basically take over the whole damn movement. Mm-hmm. So Montgomery came to the plane because Eisenhower couldn't get off of it. He was all upset because apparently they had huge communication gaps with where Eisenhower was stationed. Some of the leaders hadn't actually heard from him in weeks, or they'd get piecemeal little bits of information because for some reason the wire, everything was being done through wire, not communication, but actually like, you know, wire, like old school stuff. And so he came in all ready and started turning Eisenhower, and Eisenhower just said, hey, subtle voice, calm down. You can't talk to me that way. I'm your boss. And that kind of diffused the situation. And so Montgomery, he realized, hey, I've been trying to get a single front operation for all these months, and the old man's not allowing it to happen. But he had something in his pocket that him and his planners had just developed. We're all familiar with the V-1 rocket, right? Buzz bombs.
The buzz bomb.
Germans were launching the buzz bombs. I'm going to take a drink. You explain to the audience about buzz bombs because I'm losing my throat.
Well, the buzz bomb was the V-1, had a pulse jet engine that they were launched from angled ramps. I don't know that much about them, but I know enough to say that
their telltale signs were they basically ran until they ran out of fuel. The engine shut off. You know they're coming in. They flew slow, and so by this time of the war, the Brits had gotten pretty good at shooting these damn things down. I think they were good for like maybe 6 out of 10. They were shooting down because once you heard the engine stop, you knew it was going to crash. They were relatively slow. So they became more of a nuisance because then they were a deadly weapon at that point. But they had gotten some information that the V2 rocket was a new problem. And the V2s were starting to get launched. V2s, the engines didn't cut out. They were more methodical. They flew until they hit their predetermined target. So they didn't know when they were going to crash because the engines didn't cut out. They were able to fly further and have bigger ordnance. And they found out that most of the V2 stations were in Holland. That's where they're launching them from. And so Montgomery had gotten with his guys and said, hey, instead of just trying to do a single front into Germany and getting Eisenhower to buy off on this thing, we need to get Churchill happy because he wants us to do something about these V2 rockets. I want my single war front, but more importantly, let's come up with a plan. And so they had planned, technically, Market and Garden were two different things. Market was the dropping of the Airborne. Garden was when they bring in the armor. And so he went to Eisenhower with this and said, well, let's hold off on the whole turning the war into a single front. Clearly, you're not down for that cause. However, I have this operation I want you to look at because of these V2 rockets. Churchill's getting concerned. So he dropped the big guy's name, perk up Eisenhower's attention. The other thing he had going for him is it involved the Airborne. Now, the Airborne, on a wide scale, hadn't been utilized since Normandy. As you know from Reed and Band of Brothers, they had 16 missions. Actually, I think they said 12, but according to this book, 16 missions that were planned and then scrubbed because the land forces were just moving too quick. The ejectors were being overtaken. Yeah. And so these guys, with the exception of the 82nd Airborne, who had been doing some fighting in Italy and already had 4 combat missions underneath them, the 101st, and basically they jumped into Normandy, and they've just basically been training since then. Mm-hmm. And Eisenhower's like, we got some of the most expensive men when it comes to training. Not only was it expensive to train them, but they're the cream of the crop. They're the best of the best. You know, there's all volunteer, and you had to pass rigorous training. We have all these men and equipment, best of the best, not being utilized. And Montgomery brings me this operation that allows me to utilize them. He gets a little bit of what he wants. Churchill, if this is successful, gets what he wants. And so, after some debate, he says, to hell with it. You have your operation. You got 7 days to plan it.
Well,
they had their initial meeting on September 10th. Their jump-off date was September 17th because the whole planning behind Operation Market Garden was they believed that Germany was in disarray. The German troops were in disarray. They lost some major combat. They were retreating. They were all over the place. We need to catch them while they're off guard before they have time to stop, dig in, refit, and put up a front. So they had 7 days. But at this point, Eisenhower hadn't agreed to reallocate everything because we all know now that the biggest problem Operation Market Garden is they sent everything to this one thing, so everything else stopped. Patton stopped, all the movement everywhere else stopped, all the equipment. Mm-hmm. But this book really goes well into talking about, you know, we just think, oh, okay, well, just got to drop a couple airborne. Well, you got airborne men stationed all over. You got to get them to the airports. So we need troop transport trucks. We don't have enough of those, so now we got to go get troop transport trucks that were assigned to 1st Infantry, 20th, you know, all these different places. Reallocate them. We're going to need planes because, after all, was the Airborne known from?
Right.
Cohesiveness. The Airborne is the first, at least at that time, Army unit that they relied heavily on cohesion. They didn't just take guy from here, guy from there, and just form a squad and kick them out. These are guys who's trained and fought together. And these guys have to be on the same plane, same landing, all that. So they had to figure out that, okay, well, Got, 506 over here. Got the 82nd Airborne over there. We got Company A through, A through I out here. They got and so this thing goes in, and I've read it once about 3 years ago. I'm only on page 55 since I started rereading it, and there's basically the last 15 minutes I've regurgitated to you is in the first 55 pages of this book.
What year was that written, Don?
It's always on the third page. First publishing was 2012. The version I have is from 2013.
Okay.
And so
what you just said brings up a really good point, because that's one thing I had kind of forgotten about. Re-engaging with Band of Brothers and reading the book I'm reading now. Those guys had to be adaptable, because sure, you're Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 506. They were 2nd Battalion, right? Do you remember?
Yes. Yep.
Tight, cohesive unit, knew each other, trained together. That's all great and wonderful. But when you drop, what are the chances your entire company is going to get hooked back up?
Mm-hmm.
You're, like you said, you're going to be fighting with guys from 82nd. You're going to be fighting with somebody from another regiment. I mean, the ad hoc nature of it, I'm sure, was just mind-boggling.
And the original version of the planning for Operation Market Garden, 506 was going to be responsible for a 30-mile front, because the intention was 506 drop in. They're going to take care of 30 miles. 82nd Airborne was going to drop in. Then we know about the Red Devils. One thing a lot of people don't realize, you know who else was involved in the Operation Market Garden? The Poles. The Polish airborne troops were a part of that. And they actually dropped in further. They were, I think the Poles were 70 miles into German occupied territory. And then the Brits were, I think, 60 miles. And so right up to like day 4, they had to go to Montgomery and say, look, 506, we can't cover 30 miles. They're going to come in and annihilate us, because you're going to take our battalion and basically cut us up into little chunks to try to cover a 30-mile area. So I think they finagled, and I think they agreed on 15 miles, which is still a lot of land. But yeah, they were given the task to cover 30 miles, and obviously they had to, in which I would love. I don't think it ever happened. I don't think the glider riders, the glider pilots, man, they don't get a lot of, there's not a whole lot of mainstream coverage about what they did. And the cool thing is, on the cover of this book, you can't really see it, but that's actually a disintegrated glider behind them. It's a bunch of airborne guys, and people don't realize gliders are basically cardboard and paper on a on a metal frame.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I don't think the glider boys got any kind of name cred and Band of Brothers. And I'm not saying they should have, but I know they did. But like, Saving Private Ryan, they got a little shout out.
And the only reference you heard to them was, no, they really made no reference to the gliders, even though a lot of them had to carry the Jeeps and a lot of the vehicles. And I think it was
Band of Brothers.
Yeah, and it wasn't until later on in the war that they actually got hazard pay as well. At first, they didn't get hazard pay. But then enough of them start getting injured in the landings, because the landings of those gliders were rough. And one later till they got a little hazard. But yeah, I'm into this book, and it's definitely a good one to get, definitely a good one to add to your collection. But when you, kind of like when I'm reading Battle for Guadalcanal, I haven't gotten to the other Guadalcanal book. I'm interested to read that one, because everybody says that one's the definitive one. I'm going to be interested to see the transition, because I'll tell you what, Henry, there's a lot to be learned about Guadalcanal from the Battle for Guadalcanal book that I'm reading, which was put out in like 1954. And the one I made reference to 2 weeks ago. There's a lot of information in there. And once again, much like Operation Market Card, Guadalcanal was put together last minute. Kind of, it's a hurry, we have to take advantage of a certain situation that our enemy's in, and we kind of have to go to it. And reading September Hope, you really get the idea that General Horton and some of the other Allied commanders, they kind of looked at Operation Market Garden as, how is this going to ever work? A lot of them had the foresight that this is not going to work, but they knew Montgomery was so invested in this concept, because it got to the point where basically Montgomery had fought so much for this concept of a single front push to Germany that he looked at Operation Market Garden as this will be my way to prove to the old man that this concept will work. He's like, okay, I'm going to give up on the whole push for the whole war. Let's get Operation Market Garden to work, which we all know what happened there.
Right.
So he was putting all his coins in that basket, and like 2 days before the kickoff, they found out that there was divisions of panzers that no one had planned for, but no one wanted to listen. It was, we're all in it now. Resource allocation's been done. We're all in it, so we're just going to have to take the licks. It is what it is. And as anyone who's read Band of Brothers or Dick Winter's thoughts and opinions on Operation Market Garden, it was the leadership and the fact that every day at noon, hey, stop the war for tea time, get out the boilers, let's just chill out and relax, not take advantage of momentum.
I've always heard Montgomery was not an easy guy to work with. I think there was one, and I know very little about Market Garden. I mean, honestly, obviously the part in Band of Brothers, but the Ardennes, Battle of the Bulge, one of my favorites. My uncle was there. Okay.
Wow.
741st Tank Battalion, 2nd Armored. But
not to get mired down the mud, but no pun intended. But you're talking about Battle of the Bulge, Ardennes Forest. We know it's damn cold. Could you imagine how cold? I mean, you had the diesel tanks, the diesel engine, but they weren't running all the time, not most of the time. Just being around that big hunk of just, I don't know. Sure, it blocks the wind, but part of me just, as uncomfortable as tanks are in certain weather, just the cold had to be that much more uncomfortable.
Well, I don't know from a Sherman crewman's perspective, but there was some book written by, it might have been Otto Carius's book, Panzer Ace or something like that. It was a series of books, they all had green covers.
Okay.
Cannot remember who put them out, but anyway, this guy, German tanker, I think he was a Tiger crewman, Tiger commander. I think it was Otto Carius. And I do believe it was in that book. He talked a lot about going to sleep in a Tiger tank at night, like the metal, it drew the cold in. And they would wake up in the mornings and the condensation, on the walls of the turret and just all around them. It was just frozen.
Yeah. Because it just, for anybody who's done living history and has slept in a tent, like, for example, there's an event up in Georgia that happens every year in February. I went last year and the year before. Last year, I got smart. Last year, I stopped at Tractor Supply and got a bale of square hay to lay on the ground in my tent. Because, like you're saying, the ground draws it out. But you know what's worse than laying on the ground in cold conditions? Laying in a cot in cold conditions.
Really? Yeah.
Because there's nothing underneath you. Your body heat goes through the bottom.
Exactly. Yeah.
I've had people tell me the secret is you take a wool blanket, you unfold it so that the wool blanket touches the ground. It keeps that warm air underneath you. But I have found from doing this for the last 9 years, in the wintertime, I sleep on the ground. And last year, when I went to bed, and I'm in Florida, for people living in Ohio, New York, this isn't cold, but when you've been in Florida for 19 years and your blood's thick, when you're laying on the ground in a tent and you wake up in the morning and it's 28 degrees and all the water on your truck is frozen over, just having the little bit of air correct installation that was provided by having that hay, I basically laid the hay on the ground, laid my canvas flooring over it, 2 wool blankets, went to bed with my long johns, my uniform, my jacket, my gloves, 2 more wool blankets on top of me. I was cold, but I wasn't as bone-chillingly cold as I had been in 38-degree nights without the hay. Just that little bit of insulation. And so I can only imagine what sleeping on a cold hunk of metal when your diesel engine's not running, even with your wool jacket on, just you roll over and your earlobe touches that. How painfully cold and how much that would suck your warmth out of you. So when you say your uncle was in Battle of the Bulge in a tank, I'm just like, oh, it doesn't sound fun. And not to mention hatches freeze up.
Yeah.
Everything.
I didn't know him that well. He was my dad's older brother.
Sure.
I don't have my phone down here. It's upstairs. But and hey, well, this will be a tidbit for next episode. But my cousin sent me a picture of. So my Uncle Edward got 3 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star, and a Silver Star.
And that's Purple Hearts in a tank battle, not small arm fire.
I will read. I don't have the citations on his on his Purple Hearts, but I do on his Bronze Star and Silver Star.
Wow!
And it's pretty chilling to read them. And next episode I'll read them.
That'd be awesome.
But the guy had a pretty amazing. And so it's like I have this connection to PTO, but I have this great connection to ETO as well. But a great regret of my life is I did not know my Uncle Edward better than I did, because I mean, I probably haven't built as many models as Jeff has, but at one time I really was into model building, and just like you guys, man, I love all aspects of World War II history, and I love M4 Sherman tanks. I just love them, and knowing that my uncle was in them, I wish I could have. There's so many things I would have loved to have asked him.
Yeah.
If he was still here. But
I feel the same way about my grandfather, because obviously him working grave registration, he never talked about any of it, good, bad, or indifference.
Yeah, I mean, he saw the absolute.
And the fact that I grew up 2 hours away from him. My parents got divorced. My dad moved me, my brother, my sister up to Ohio. The rest of my family's in northern Kentucky. And so I'm sure there's stories my cousins have heard as they got older and age appropriate. Maybe he discussed, but I was never around. And so he passed away in, I think, 2003. And so I never really got to discuss any of them. Closest thing I have is the Army dog tags I wear when I do my living history are exact replicas of his. My uncle sent me a photo, and so my Army dog tags are his service number, his name. Interesting thing I found looking at that is the name of the next of kin on his dog tags was my grandmother's father. Now, you would think that going off to war, you would have your own parents as the next of kin.
You would think, yeah.
But the only thing I can think of is my grandfather came from eastern Kentucky, poor coal mining area. I mean, I remember growing up, or after he passed away, I was at my grandmother's house. She still had some of his old company chit, they called it, the company coins. That these people a lot of people, younger cats may not know, how these coal mines were operated. People talk about how horrible Amazon is and how their employees aren't allowed to take a urine break every so many hours. And a lot of them are peeing in bottles because they don't want to get their name tags actually have geographical locations. And so they know where they're at inside the building all the time and all this horrible stuff. When you worked in the coal mines in the 1800s and early 1900s, just imagine if Amazon not only did all that horrible crap, but then they owned all of the housing around the Amazon plant and in your town, and all the grocery stores run by Amazon. And so instead of paying you in currency, they paid you in Amazon gift cards that can only be used at Amazon. And so these coal miners and their families, they would work all these hours, get paid in company coin, and had to use them to pay the rent on the company-owned houses, and that currency was only good at the company-owned grocery stores that had huge markup. And so you're basically living in your own little world, and your only other option was either work there or break loose. And that's how my grandfather met my grandmother. He left the coal mining. He went to Richwood, Kentucky. Great Depression. My grandmother's side of the family basically lost most of their liquid assets and were relying on property they owned, which my grandparents actually used to sustain my mom's side of the family all the way up until they passed away. They would just sell off blocks of real estate here and there. But with that being said, my grandfather moved to Richwood and started working at my grandmother's father's dairy farm, and saw my grandma. They got married. My grandfather went off to war, and it's cool. I have a copy of their wedding photo. Actually, it's going to be on the What's the Scuttlebutt website, because we're working on an About Us page where we have bios on all the hosts, and it's there, but you guys can't see it still in draft format. But at the top, you'll see my grandparents' wedding photo, and my grandfather's actually in his khaki dress uniform shirts. So
Nice.
But yeah, so that's how they met, and the only thing I can think of is either A, he had a falling out with his family, or B, they were so poor in Eastern Kentucky that it was just easier to get a letter, phone call, or a wire to his now more prosperous and well-to-do father-in-law than his poor family back in Eastern Kentucky. It's the only thing I can think of, because no one's around to answer that question anymore. My grandmother passed away too.
Yeah.
But anyhow. Yeah, Airborne's another fun fact in here. They don't talk about it a lot in Band of Brothers. 82nd Airborne. Apparently, some people believe the person responsible for the spread of STDs throughout England. They came back from the war and they just went to town. And it wasn't syphilis. It was scabies of all things. 82nd Airborne spread scabies all throughout.
Man,
England.
There's an accomplishment you want on your resume.
Yep. And I guess some of the 101st had the same issue, but yeah, they picked up a bad batch of scabies, and then when they came to town, they just spread it around.
Let her rip.
So there's some fun facts like that in here, and that's all within the first 55 pages. So there's a lot of good information in that book. And I would love to have him on. So if you're developing a relationship with him, just say, hey, we'd love to have you on the podcast.
Our friend requested him, and he accepted it. But I mean, hey, I don't know, like, and you're not a big aviation guy. Jeff is. But Barrett Tillman's written probably every book I've ever read on naval aviation in World War II. Bruce Gamble, written several great books. The best one I've ever read on VMF 214, the Black Sheep Squadron. And, I friend request these people and they accept it. But I don't know that they go, oh, Henry Sledge. Oh, yeah, Sledge, Eugene Sledge. I don't know that that's anything.
And a lot of time, if they're not truly personal pages, it could just be their assistant on there. Because a lot of these cats,
Sure.
Especially the ones, our age or older, they're not into, it's something and I learned this from working radio. And granted, it's been 3 years, but back then they would actually spend money on Facebook consultants to tell you how to best use the algorithm, because Facebook would change it so many times. And at the time, Facebook's kind of dying out now. At the time, Facebook was it when it came to marketing. I don't know if you noticed now, ever since the election and people starting to lose faith in the honesty of Facebook, Facebook is kind of turning away from the independent interface. All their advertising, whether it's on YouTube, if you listen to any music on Pandora, if you hear a Facebook ad, it'll all be focused around Facebook groups. That's where they're putting all their focus now. It's all about, oh, you're in the macrame? Come join a Facebook group on macrame. You're in a World War II? Come join a World... And that is great. That's what a lot of people use it for. But they realized the standalone model that used to be Facebook of just posting on your timeline and see what all your friends are doing, that's kind of going away, and they're kind of reconstructing it to be more grouped based, which is pretty much what I use it for, is a World War II reenacting.
That's what I use it for. I mean, like we were talking earlier, man. I mean, World War II in the Pacific, World War II fighters and their pilots. I mean, and it's like, okay, now I enjoy looking at Facebook instead of seeing, some guy that I knew 20 years ago putting some political rant on there. And now I'm like, oh, great. Now I'm even in a worse mood than I was when I picked my damn phone up,
I would love to see some stats on what kind of damage Facebook has done to the attendance of high school reunions. Because before Facebook, and even MySpace for that matter, the only time you see all these people were to go to your high school reunion. But now that you see them online, you may have not talked to them in 20 years, but you feel like you have. Like
that's actually a really interesting question, because it's like it takes... I don't want to get into talking about Facebook. We're a World War II thing, man.
Well, we
got to stay true.
Nah, you can veer off a little bit, because it's honesty. Just like 2 weeks ago, guy I went to high school with, he lives 45 minutes away from me, even though we both went to high school in Ohio. He was in the Marine Corps. He did 20 years, retired, just so happened to move 20 minutes away from me. He and I went out kayak fishing 2 weeks ago. It is the first time I have occupied the same space on this God's green plains since June 6th, 1997. The night we graduated high school. First time I've been in the same room with him. But because we were friends on Facebook and I'd seen his photos and I had seen him aged when he walked down the boat ramp and we shook each other's hands for the first time since 1997, it wasn't that mind-blowing of a deal because, once again, we had been communicating through Facebook Messenger and seeing each other's families' pictures and all that on Facebook. And so it would not surprise me in the least to find out 10 years from now that they're doing studies, find out that no one shows up to their high school graduations anymore because, well, they see people.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
It kind of takes all the guesswork out of everything.
Yep. Thank you, guys. We're not done yet, but I just want to get this in. This episode of the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast, I always have to pause because my other podcast is called the What's in Your Head. I got too many podcasts with the word what in it. But anyhow, this one came first. This episode of the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast has been brought to you by our friends at At Computers. At Computers has been providing IT solutions for all of Southwest Florida since 2004. And even if you're not in Southwest Florida and you need some help with your computer, as long as your internet works, of course, give them a call at 239-283-1120, and they can assist you via their website with remote login. And once again, that number is 239-283-1120, or go over to act-capecoral.com. If you do live in the Southwest Florida area, they can help you with computer repair, laptop repair, network migrations, domain controller management, all the good stuff. Anything technical based, they can help you. And while you're on the internet, please head over to WTSPWorldWar2.com. Click on Patreon, sign up. The base plan is only $1 a month. I do need to get Henry and Jeff and maybe team up with my brother and do what we call, you haven't done one yet. We actually have a Patreon-based podcast that we do every once in a while. It's called the OG5 podcast. The only people here are Patreon members. It's just kind of like, here's a little exclusive content. It may talk about something completely different than the podcast you may hear us on. We may spend 20 minutes talking about cars, whatever, but it's just a little exclusive. It's a little thank you for signing up, supporting the show. Even if you're only paying the $1 a month plan, you still have access to all the same content. Whenever we do come up with new merchandise or I print up a new batch of stickers, I'll hit up people on Patreon, say, hey, you want some stickers? Give me your address. I'll send them to you for free. If you do sign up for the $7.50 a month plan, you do get a free t-shirt after month 2. So that's a benefit. But in the last few months, we have picked up a handful of new patrons. So thank you, guys. You can find those links over at WTSPWorldWar2.com. If you're on a smartphone, you have to scroll to the bottom just because of the way the page is laid out. Or actually, I think on WTSPWorldWar2.com, if you click the 3 buttons on the left, a mystery toolbar will pop out, and you'll see the Patreon link there. I'm doing it on my phone as we speak because the website's a little
while you're looking for that, let me put in a plug for our What's the Scuttlebutt podcast t-shirts.
Okay.
My son loves the one you sent. You sent him the same one I got because he asked for it. Wore it to school. He really likes it. It's a good looking t-shirt.
And, not to go over the radio stuff. One of the things I learned working in radio, whenever we hand out radio t-shirts, the t-shirts are a low quality, they shrink. And so when I did the WTSP t-shirts and all the D-Digital 410 t-shirts, I recommend the premium stuff. We do have the lower end t-shirts, which are basically the same quality you'll get at a radio station giveaway. They're pretty much all cotton. They will shrink. So when you do buy our shirts, they're a little bit more, but choose the premium ones. As Henry can attest to, they are quality grade t-shirts. They fit nice. They will not shrink. When you order the premiums, these aren't the cheap ones that you get at giveaways where the bottoms curl up and they just look like, these are nice t-shirts. I'm wearing a Lucky Strike shirt. I do have, but they're great shirts. And if you guys are on YouTube, while you're on our website, I'll bring up YouTube for a reason because of the t-shirt thing, but it's all going to tie together. While you're on WTSPWorldWar2.com, click on our YouTube channel. Please subscribe. We need 4 more people to get to 500. But I say all that to say this. Chances are, if you're into this podcast on YouTube, you've watched Demolition Ranch videos. Matt goes and shoots up all this cool stuff in Texas. The shirts you get from our website are basically the same quality shirts if you guys buy anything from Bunker Branding. That's what I was getting to. So they are good quality shirts. We had an issue with one of them in the past, but the vendor made it right. I will say this. They are slow going to get them, and here's why. These shirts are made to order. This protects me. I make no money off of them, which is a different thing. But with that being said, is I don't have anything invested. It's not like I had to invest a couple $100 and have boxes of t-shirts sitting around my garage saying, what am I going to do with all these shirts? When you order them, they're actually not printed until you order them. So with that being said, they do take a week or two to get, because what they try to do is they'll wait so many days and then take all the t-shirts ordered within that time and then print them off at the same time and then mail them out. So they aren't the quickest shirts in the world to get, but that's because they're not printed until you order them, and they come directly from the vendor, who is Teespring, which, interestingly enough, they will ship out of my hometown of Union, Kentucky. But you got anything else you wanted to plug there, Henry?
Our next We Happy Few 506 episode, my buddy Leighton messaged me yesterday. I think that next episode will be November 27th. So the last episode, which I was not part of because we were at the beach, was on the Barcelona story. The upcoming one will be on Peleliu.
Mm-hmm.
So I won't go into who it looks like will be the guests on there in addition to me, but sounds like it will be a really good show. The other thing, I'll be on Mitchell Bell's Tall Tales of Taco tomorrow.
Nice.
Now, aren't you and Jeff? Isn't he going to have you and Jeff on there too at some point?
At some point. It was tentatively for October, which here we are. Jeff's handling that. I know how these things are. I schedule people for 3 different podcasts. I'm not sure when we're going to be on there, but we'll be on when we do get a date. We'll let everybody know, but you're on there. That's coming up. You said this weekend?
That's tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Great. Now, is that already in the can, or are you recording it tomorrow?
No, we're recording it tomorrow. I guess it's going to be live.
Okay, cool.
But we're recording it tomorrow.
Fantastic. And
so there's that.
World War II TV.
Yes, thank you.
See, that's why I asked you before the show, so I can write it down.
Yes, you're experienced with all this. That's great.
Because we forget. Go ahead.
Paul Woodage, World War II TV. I've really enjoyed watching. Our good friend Brian Dimitrovich hooked me up with him. And Brian was on 2 weeks ago?
Last episode, for those who were going via episode, it would have been 2 weeks ago for us, but we didn't record an episode last week. So it's actually, if you're listening to this podcast, it would be last episode.
Okay. So Brian hooked me up with Paul Woodage, World War II TV. Paul and I have exchanged emails. He invited me to come on the show. That will be November 5th, I believe, as it stands right now. So I'm excited about that. He sounds like he's a big fan of my dad's book. I've heard him talk about, I watched the episode he had with Saul David, who is the author of Crucible of Hell. And they talked a lot about my dad. I wasn't expecting that. That was totally cool. But I'll put in a plug for Saul David. So I've got his book, Crucible of Hell in Okinawa, on the way. And he has very kindly asked me to read his manuscript on an upcoming book for him called Devil Dogs, which is about K-35.
Beautiful.
K Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. So
I got to get so much better at remember authors' names. You and Jeff do that to me all the time. You'll mention an author, and I'm like, and I'm like, I got to cast my eyes at my library and see the book. I focus on the names of the books.
Yeah.
And not so much on the authors. I got to get so much better so that when I'm in situations in real time where you and Jeff mention an author's name, it's not until you mention the title of a book or two they wrote that I realize who they are. It's just, with the exception of obviously your father or Robert Leckie or Stephen Ambrose, I get the book, I pick up a book, I read it, it's good. That book, the Forgotten 500, you should really check that one out at some point. It's a damn cool story. Basically, long story short, 500 or so downed pilots throughout a certain theater of operation. They get rounded up, and then they got to land an airplane on the side of a mountain to get them. But there's a civil war going on in that. It's just a great book. We had the author on 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay.
I need to do something on WTSP. We have those who were there, so people can easily find the interviews we did with people who were alive during the time. I'm going to make another menu option It'll take me a while. I want to put all the authors I've interviewed so that when we say, oh, they've been on the show, you don't have to go through the archives. You can just go to the authors, and all their author interviews will be on there. That way people can find them quicker, and separate it that way as well. Anything else? We kind of went in the weeds a little bit. Anything else you want to discuss on Band of Brothers before we go?
No, man. I think we did a pretty good job of touching on some different stuff. And I mean, look, like you said, this is a World War II podcast. I mean, we'll get into at some point. I'm sure we need to. I really want to get deeper into the Battle of the Bulge. More talk about armor, airplanes, Eastern Front. I love Eastern Front stuff. I
got a book I got to dig into. Someone gave me a book on German submarines. We don't ever talk about submarine battles on here. I got this book. I don't know where I got it from. Have you read Panic in the Pacific?
Who wrote it?
There you go again. Bill, I'm looking at the book from across the room. I was going, after I was sending all those photos of my books yesterday, I started putting them in order. So all my PTO stuff's on one shelf, all the paratrooper stuff, and I came across this book someone gave me at some point called Panic in the Pacific by Bill Yenne, Yenne, Yavine, I think. I have got it on my shelf. I haven't read it yet, so I'm going to have to get to that one here soon. But
not familiar with it.
I got a few books that I didn't buy myself, that I need to get to. Another good book is actually about What's the Army Infantry Division that was made up entirely of Japanese Americans? 25th, 28th.
Heard of it, but I could not answer the number.
World War II infantry made up of Japanese Americans. I think it was the 28th. The 442nd. Which, interestingly enough, if you go back and watch Karate Kid, Mr. Miyagi was a member of the 442nd. I bring that up because there's a book I read. Actually, now I know why I have the Panic at the Pacific, because he wrote Rising Suns. And I read Rising Suns, and then I went and ordered Panic at the Pacific. That's why I have it. Same author. Rising Sun is interesting because it's about the 442nd, but what's interesting about it, he goes into something that you probably weren't aware of, and that is the makeup of Hawaii at the time of Pearl Harbor as far as population makeup.
Uh-huh.
There was more Japanese expats in first generation, even though Hawaii was not a state yet, it was an American colony. But there was more Japanese expats living in Hawaii than there were Anglo-Saxon Americans at the time.
Really?
Which is why, and there was a huge California, and I think Washington State were only second and third to Hawaii in demographic of Japanese Americans. And that is why the West Coast did what they did with the internment camps. And in Rising Suns, he goes over the history of first generation and expat Japanese and how they came to Hawaii and how they made up a huge demographic. People don't realize that during Pearl Harbor, there was more, next to the natives, Hawaiians, the next big population of a race were Japanese or ex-Japanese patriots, or, people living in both areas. But that's part of the why they freaked out the way they did when it came to American citizens of Japanese descent, because they didn't know who to trust, because there was more of them in Hawaii than there were Americans or Anglo-Saxon Americans. And that's something you never hear about in reading that book Rising Sun about the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, which is why when I read the name off Panic at the Pacific, I was like, that sounds familiar. Then I look over in Rising Suns. That's why I bought that book. I'll read a book, I'll like the author, and I'll go out and order another book and then forget about it and then ask you on a podcast, have you ever heard of this book? But anyhow, this is our life. I still think it's insane. The other thing World War II has done to my life, as somebody who grew up with a learning disability and graduated high school with a D in college prep history, but didn't have to take reading or math proficiency tests because, well, I have a learning disability. I never read. I would never read. I didn't read, with the exception of my Microsoft certification books, which I struggled through in 2001. I didn't leisure read until I got into World War II. My very first book I ever purchased that wasn't given to me was a book I showed you a picture of the other day, Brothers in Battle, The Best of Friends, Babe Heffron and Wild Bill Garnier. First book I ever read for leisure reading that wasn't assigned to me through a school. Never could read out loud. If you go back and listen to early episodes of this podcast, I would, you guys heard me read tonight. I do a pretty decent job aloud, but when I first started this podcast, a 5-minute monologue would take me 2 hours to record because my reading skills weren't that great. But I'm looking at a bookshelf with probably close to 60, 70 World War II books, and I've read probably 3/4 of them. And in the case of your father's book, I read that one 4 times. I've read Strong Men Armed 3 times. I've read Helmet for My Pillow probably 4 or 5 times. I've read Sid Phillips' books multiple times. So, and this is the second time through. And so not only do I read them, but I read them multiple times. So.
Oh yeah.
But anyhow, that's going to wrap it up for this episode because I'm starting to lose my voice after talking for 122 minutes straight. As always, for myself, Henry Sledge, and the missed Jeff Copsetta, who should be back next week.
Yeah, we hope so.
We want to thank you guys for continuing to support our podcast. And, going to Patreon's great. Subscribing on YouTube's great. But the best thing you can do for a podcast, because there's so many of them out there, share us with a friend. If you know somebody who might enjoy who enjoys World War II, who enjoys podcast, email them a link, send it in a text message, post it on our Facebook page. You can't beat word of mouth advertising, so please.
And send us ideas about things you want us to talk about.
Yes, I always forget that. I need to add that to my list. Email us, mail call. I was saying the other podcast, mail call at WTSP World War II, and that is WWII.com. So mail call at WTSPWorldWar2.com, or send us a message on Facebook. Give us ideas, something you want to talk about. If you yourself have a lot of knowledge on a topic we haven't covered and you think you could provide 30 minutes worth of conversation, we will be more than happy to have you on the show. Because after all, who better to talk history than other history buffs? So please, if you're interested in coming on the show, or if you just have some topic ideas or criticisms or comments, whatever, please email us or send us a message on Facebook, and we will happily read them. Henry, thank you so much, and we will talk to you all next week. And now this is where I stretch to find this.
This has been a Digital 410 production.